Hello, everyone. My name is Matt, and this is Kaylin, and we are two physical therapists who have really just been fortunate enough to be working in esports for the past 3 years. For me, two of those years have been with CLG, and now with all the teams over at Immortals and primarily LA Valiant. And Caitlin has been really working all over with teams and events across multiple game titles from Dota to Smash and many more. This is HPforGamers, and it's a new web series we want to start to help everyone gamers, healthcare professionals, business and administrative staff, 90-year-olds, yo-yo masters, literally everyone to help understand how we can maximize health and performance in the world of esports. And we want to provide HP in the form of knowledge to gamers all over the world. And today, this is episode 1, and we're going to be talking about the current state of health and performance in esports. And while this can be a really lengthy discussion, our goal is to really just provide a general picture of where we are today, and maybe we'll talk a little more deeply as we get some more guests on. So before our special mystery guest today, I want to first go over or preface this discussion with some of my thoughts that I had with where we are in general with esports. And first off, I think that we're really in the early stages of esports as an industry, specifically with health and performance. And I think that a lot of teams are investing in health, but they don't really know what they're looking for. I also think that performance is still very dependent on practice and coaching structure, and even though there's no doubt that there's benefits to things like exercise, nutrition, and sports psych protocols, it's only sort of this marginal benefit when there's a weak foundation of what I call the core team. And the core team meaning the head coach and the athlete, and then the support team being people like us, assistant coaches, physical therapists, all to work on specific skills training, conditioning, and sports psychology. So today we're very, very lucky to have Dr. Doug Gardner, the Director of Performance over at Immortals, to be joining us for this episode. Doug is a specialist in the areas of athletic development, performance enhancement, and athletic transition, and has worked as a sports psychology consultant across multiple teams from the NFL to baseball, and many more. And I've had the pleasure of working with him for the past year, and I really consider him as having the best understanding for both the art and the science of helping players develop themselves within a system. So welcome, Doug. And let me just bring him on. There he is.
Hello, Matt. Hi, Caitlin.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, welcome. Let's just get this.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get this going. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were, really overall, on the state of both health and performance in esports today.
Well, listen, I upper end in health and wellness in esports right now. I think the old narrative of players grinding and putting in insanely crazy hours is something that is changing. I won't even say slowly changing. I'm seeing this in the Overwatch League, listening to players from other teams talk, using terms like rest and recovery, and making sure that they're not just practicing hour after hour. And I think that you're starting to see this growth in esports as a whole. Overwatch is one indicator of it. I've also been around the CSGO scene, and of course, the work of Astralis is well known and well publicized. And I think that it's when organizations who are having success have committed to holistic development and work-life balance and making sure that people are taking care of themselves outside of the competition environment and the practice environment. It's just like any other sport. They're going to copy best practices from what organizations are doing. And I think that we are literally setting the tone here at LA Valiant in doing this and creating a culture where other organizations are going to follow our lead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may be the only ones that have people like us on staff. I mean, I know Australis definitely does, um, but I guess we're one of the few organizations that have a system or a department dedicated directly for performance. And yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think it is absolutely changing. Although I felt like it was slow before, in that a lot of people, even though they knew there's so many negative effects to things like sitting or just playing for long hours, they didn't really actively do anything about it. I still feel that there's this point where we kind of have to show the value of what we're doing, or convince sort of these organizations that they need this, instead of them actively sort of seeking it out in the first place. So I think we're kind of on this tipping point, or it seems like we're on this tipping point with, at least with health, and maybe more so now with performance, where we have to, have a lot of professionals like us demonstrate enough value to these organizations so that they would be more proactive in bringing us on, and having us develop these systems within the teams. Because I
Yeah,
don't
and
think there's really a standard. Sorry, go on.
I want to say like two things you said there, because one, that the health aspect kind of came along a little sooner than the performance aspect did, which like I'm pretty much in agreement with, because a lot of the organizations, right as I started working in esports, were becoming more health conscious, in the sense that they were definitely looking at injury management and starting to look at injury prevention and kind of what that would look like. But even then, it was still kind of like a far and few between kind of thing. It was more very specifically, how do you not get injured? And then more recently, there's been this explosion in terms of not just, okay, how do I avoid the bad thing, but how do I make the good thing better? How do I improve performance? And what aspects go into that? So I've loved seeing the rise of like what Complexity's been doing, what Optic's been doing with the Innovative Performance Institute and Taylor Johnson over there, Astralis, and you guys over at Immortals and Valiant. I think Cloud9 might have their own team PT. I don't know about the rest of a performance staff, but I hear they have a PT, which would be pretty
I heard
damn
they
awesome.
do too. Yeah.
But it's been really cool to kind of see that progression from just how do we use kind of what's there to avoid injury, to how do we use what we're building to make us better players and organizations and teams, and I guess really holistically from that viewpoint. And I actually forgot the second thing that I was going to seize on that you said.
Well, the thing I'd like to add too is that I think community driven. The one appeal of esports is that the community plays such a large role in impacting organizations and players, and so just this heightened level of mental health awareness and discussions around mental health really legitimize the concerns and allow for people to have a voice for things that they were concerned about speaking up about in the past. And so since we're in a culture and a community where mental health matters, and trying to live a healthy lifestyle in a variety of different ways means something and resonates, it has almost a trickle up effect on coming from the grassroots of the community, and it almost forces organizations to have to acknowledge these types of things and address them and provide resources for their players.
And I think the resources is the really important point. I know something Matt and I have run into has been kind of demonstrating why specifically physical therapists like us would be a more valuable resource, or I guess more accurately, a differently valuable resource than, say, someone with a background in personal training or someone with a background in exercise kinesiology, which is not to say that those things are not valuable in performance enhancement in teams, but it's an entirely different skill set. And someone who's, just got their ACSM is not going to have kind of the same breadth of knowledge that maybe even somebody who has their CSCS has. And that's the kind of differentiation that you really only know when you've been working in performance or the medical field for a while. So there's definitely a bit of a hurdle in terms of making it clear why you might want one type of professional or why you might not another, or why a professional is even necessary in the first place, as opposed to just a very enthusiastic layman.
I agree 100%. It was really my experiences in traditional sports that made me realize it was a no-brainer to me that building out a department meant that I wanted to have a physical therapist involved above above everything else. Plus, I have a ton of injuries and hurt myself over the years of playing sports. So I understand personally how important great physical therapists can be in many different aspects of health. And so the consumer or organizations don't always know how to differentiate between different people with different professions. And I think every profession has its role within an esports organization, just like they do in traditional sport organizations. But for me, making that statement that I want to bring a physical therapist on board, it was done with purpose and intent.
Yeah, for sure. So how do we kind of make that jump to getting teams to understand why they would want a specific professional as opposed to just, well, they have their bachelor's in kinesiology and they've been doing personal training and they kind of know what they're doing. Like, I don't know, how do we kind of bridge that gap between they're enthusiastic and want to do this versus is that enough?
I think it's a great question, and it's a question that I think in both esports and traditional sports, it's first and foremost, it's education. The more that you can educate people and key decision makers on what the differences are and the importance of understanding basically what you are looking for and what you're looking to hire. If any organization, doesn't have to be an esports organization, if any organization wants to be able to say, hey, we have people who do all these things, they can hire people. But the challenge is hiring the best people and doing your homework and being an active consumer and caring about the people in your organization and wanting to provide them with the best resources. So when you have those opportunities, you want to be able to not just differentiate why am I better or why is this better than something else. It's understanding why is this important and understanding that magnitude of that importance. Right. And then from there, it's demonstrating. Then you get the position, and then you have to go do something and show why it's important. And that's really, I think, where sports psychology was this way 20, 25 years ago. Physical therapy has always been more accepted. Athletic training has been more accepted. Anything where you can actually provide treatment and show improvements is something that has grown and skyrocketed over the last 20 to 30 years. And I think that's one of the issues in sports psychology. Sometimes it's hard to tangibly measure improvement. You can't just have KPIs. But at the end of the day, when you're in a new ecosystem such as esports, it always comes back down to educating the key decision makers so that they can make the most informed decision that they're going to make in terms of what's best for their organization.
Yeah.
So you've kind of mentioned like a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding is one of the big hurdles that you've been overcoming. What other hurdles have you run into with like either teams or specifically with players when you're working with them? It sounds like buy-in is part of a problem sometimes.
Buy-in is always a part of the problem. I think, and that's where the mental training and physical training come into play. Often people know that they need to work things in order to get better. It's the fact that all of a sudden you're sitting or standing in front of them and you're explaining to them what they have to do, and then the concept of having to work at something and to invest time and energy is scary. I mean, psychologically, it gets scary for people to have to work on something new or work on something that they aren't good at. It creates stress responses oftentimes, and so that's why there is, and Matt kind of alluded to this in the beginning, is there is an art form to our work, all of the work of anybody in a helping profession, of how to teach concepts of intrinsic motivation, of getting people to follow through on their exercises and making sure that they're doing the work on their own so they don't just show up on your table and say, okay, treat me, and I haven't done anything since the last time I saw you. And that in some ways is no different than a golf instructor. You can talk to a golf instructor and here you are taking a lesson with a golf instructor, and then the golf instructor says, okay, I want you to practice these things, and then next time we come back, we go and work on something else, and lo and behold, usually the client comes back and says, oh, I haven't done anything since our last lesson. So it's how do you get people to take ownership over their own development, over understanding not only the importance of what they need to do, but learning how to start that process and then stick with it and ingrain that in and make that a routine in their everyday life. And once you can do that, then you're getting buy-in.
Yeah. I mean, I want to touch back on the first question that you asked, Kevin, about, how do we get this integrated into esports, I guess, more effectively. I think there's definitely this reality that, all the key decision makers in esports currently, they're pretty young. If we actually look at a lot of the key decision makers across all these organizations, there are a lot of young people that might not be educated to make the right decisions about who to bring on and how it can actually benefit their team at a really micro level. They don't
Right, just from
see
like a sheer lack of exposure,
exactly,
not
exactly.
kind of intentional ignorance.
So, which is why I agree so much with Doug in that, hey, there does need to be this level of education, not only for our community, but really for everyone, right? For these people on the higher up to really understand, hey, there's physical therapists that can really ensure that injuries can be prevented because it's simple to prevent, and we need applied sports psychologists to help them deal with stress because, hey, they're playing 28 games this season, and last year they played 40 games this season, and there was minimal breaks in between. So it really, and even though it shouldn't have to be said, they really need to dedicate at least effort to understanding the industry a little more, at least understanding what we do within the industry, so that they can again make the right decision to bring these on, or actually have the initial motivation to want to build out a department that has people like myself and Doug. So again, I'm fortunate that I get to work with Doug in this endeavor in Overwatch League for LA Valiant, and that Immortals is helping us or letting us do what we're doing.
And I think kind of on a similar note too, it's not just about providing education for the teams, for the organizations, for the players, for the community, but also it's about providing education for medical professionals like us who are interested in getting into this scene.
Oh yeah.
Like the esports community as a whole, which is like saying the American community as a whole, because it's that massive and covers that many subtitles, but the esports community as a whole is justifiably skeptical about new kind of sub industries entering the esports scene. There's been more than a few people who've bilked people out of money, just cheated players, only been there for their own name, for their fame, or for the money. And so I get why people are looking for new hands on deck to prove their worth. It's a matter of, I guess, self-protection, and so that education component is just so hugely important, not just for the community but for those medical professionals coming in to be able to speak to, here's what I can do that matters, here's why this is valuable, and making it clear that we're not here to capitalize on the success of esports. We're here to make sure you don't get hurt or you play better.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. I mean, yeah, I feel like that's one thing that, I mean, our community or everyone in the industry really needs to better understand. And I guess that needs to be to my next question, Doug, is that what do you think is kind of the number one thing really, let's say maybe just the business staff or maybe support staff of certain organizations in esports, what do they need to understand about health and performance?
Well, I think that it's not linear. That it's just not going to be a pie chart or growth chart where the trend is just continuing to go upward. Development is a process, and we're dealing with human beings, and we're dealing with young people, and you're dealing with this interesting mix of young people who are at the highest level of what it is that they're doing. So you can look to traditional sports such as gymnastics and swimming, and I mean a lot of other sports where you see an influx of, I mean, you've had gymnasts as young as 14, 15 years old in the Olympics. You're now having esport athletes who are roughly anywhere from 16 in certain game titles, all the way up to now people entering their early 30s, and so we're in this undefined territory of how long a career can last. But most importantly, what you're doing is you have this infrastructure where people are at the highest level of their profession, and the path to that is not something where it's not similar. Let's just say they grind and they improve on ladder, and next thing you know, they're on a team, and all of a sudden they have 6 people they have to interact with. They never had a coach before. Now they have a coach. And then take into effect that people are young, and these are not negatives. These are positives. There's an incredible amount of energy, enthusiasm, and open-mindedness amongst a lot of the people I interact with and players I interact with in esports. I think that there is this level of craving knowledge and wanting to be coached and wanting to be taught and wanting to learn how to have discipline for themselves in terms of how they prepare and how they perform. I think that the environment and the people in it want the information. And so to me, it's not just like, oh, they're so young and all these kind of negative narratives or potentially negative narratives. I see tremendous opportunity because there's the opportunity to mold and impact young people and utilize their experiences in esports to help them in their life now and in their life down the road.
Wow, yeah. I love that. I mean, I agree with everything that you said there. I mean, it's so rare, I feel like, for people to consider that, you know, all these barriers that they may have when communicating with these young kids are actually opportunities for them to really grow as individuals. I mean, even a year ago, working with some of the players that we've been working with, you know, they weren't really compliant with a lot of the things we were asking them. And now after 40 games and, you know, us steadily building some rapport with them, you know, they're really starting to show why it's important to have discipline, or understanding why it's important to have discipline and why it's important to regularly take care of themselves. And it's not so much that we have to ask them anymore about or try to educate them about why it's important. It's now more, hey, like, you guys are the experts, just let us know what to do, we want to learn. And I think that's so right. I mean, even I felt it in the past 3 years, just they're just yearning for some guidance, and there needs to be this foundation in esports and this infrastructure that allows for the right people to reach them. Because I feel like it's also very easy for people that, you know, might not have the right intent. Maybe they want to just make some money, or they might be providing some more or less superficial strategies to address stress. You know, in the end, I think we're in a really good position we're fortunate to be in this position because we understand at least human behavior. I mean, I feel like I understand a little bit about human behavior, that I can help these guys grow as individuals and make better decisions about their health and make better decisions that might impact them, you know, both inside and outside the game. For me, that's always what it's been. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we get along so well, because we share a lot of those same values.
And this goes back to Caitlin's point. I mean, thank you. Point of this, how do we build things with organizations? It's about relationships and trust. And you could be the best, brightest, we all know this, you could be the best, brightest, know everything, but if you can't establish relationships, rapport, and trust with the people you're working with, then you're never going to get buy-in. And so relationships matter. And it's just a matter of how do you formulate relationships with people who aren't used to having people, professionals like us around. And once they understand that we're human beings, I mean, look at me, I'm 50 years old and I'm working with a bunch of 20-somethings. And so at some point, I have to get past this guy looks like my dad to, hey, this guy's my uncle. You know, the cool uncle syndrome, I always call it. But at the end of the day, spent more time building trust and relationships with the people we work with so that they know that we do have their best interest in mind. And that's, I think, what's important for organizations is that it's like, do you want the optic of saying we have somebody who does this stuff, or are you going to commit to the concept of player development and give the professionals the time that they need to build the trust, build the rapport, build the relationship so that we can start building the performer better?
Yeah. 100%.
And I think that's one of those, like, that's one of the more difficult things to teach someone too, that how do you develop rapport with people? I recently made the jump from working in inpatient hospital acute care to working in outpatient again. And I was kind of worried about, you know, not the knowledge gap necessarily, but there are skills that you don't have to draw on when you work in the hospital. And there are definitely things you have to draw on when you're working an outpatient. And I was a little worried about kind of the learning curve that would be there, or the relearning curve, really. But my boss, my supervisor who interviewed me, she was like, look, there's all kinds of things we can do to get you up to speed when it comes to your ability to provide manual therapy, your familiarity with up-to-date orthopedics research. The things that we can't teach you are how to make patients want to work with you. That's one of those intangible things that it's a little bit harder to learn. So I'd much rather have somebody who's got, a baseline level of skill and knowledge, and background, but has that interest, that passion, that ability to connect. And I think that's kind of one of the things that at least a couple of the medical professionals I know have run into trying to work with esports competitors. Not so much that they didn't care, but that they didn't take the time to know enough about what players actually need, what players are actually looking for, like what's the need you're meeting when you're working in this community.
Yeah.
100%. Esports, and I think it even goes in, I've been in traditional sports, a very long time, working as a professional, 20 years. And I think one of the issues that I've seen in esports is that you cannot just come into the esport environment and just assume that you can adopt the same concepts that from traditional sports into this. You obviously want to utilize the best practices and specific approaches, but at the end of the day, this is not traditional sport. It is esport. Yep. And it's important to understand the nuances between the two. And if you try to stuff a square peg in a round hole, then you're going to create problems. And I think that's where it goes back to education for organizations, understanding that, yes, this plan sounds great, but if somebody from traditional sports is just going to, sit here and try to shove some type of a strength conditioning program down the throat of the players, then there's going to be pushback because it's not built into the culture of esports. It's not like everybody spends an hour and a half or 2 hours doing warm-ups and training and gym stuff because they're going to see a direct correlation on a field or on a court. Here it's different. And so we know that through physical activity and through personal and professional development, that performance can improve, but as long as we don't come in with trying to, push a traditional sport agenda onto esport performers, then I think that is something that will help people be more successful.
For sure. Then it doesn't feel like trying to take this, cookie cutter thing. And the thing is, traditional sports and sports performance are far from cookie cutter. It's very much customized to the sport, to the team, to the athlete. But trying to come in with that sport model and using anything but kind of the skeleton of it is definitely trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, which even in Apollo 13, which is clearly one of the best movies of all time, required a whole bunch of engineering to make it fit the actual situation. We've got to build the connector pipe between the square peg and the round hole. And there's a metaphor here about oxygen, but it's going to take too long to find.
I like it.
Yeah. Let's see. I think we have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Kate, I think you had another question to ask.
Yeah, because we kind of touched on this, but let's dive into it, I guess, specifically. What kinds of things can medical professionals do to be better prepared when working with these sports competitors? We've talked about not just bringing in the sports model. We've talked about, developing that rapport and having an understanding of what players need. But if we were teaching a seminar to aspiring sports psychologists or PTs, what should we be teaching them about how to be best prepared to work in this esports scene?
Well, it's a great question. And to me, there is this aspect of shutting up and learning, get into an environment, sit in a corner, watch, learn, listen, observe, not come in and try to impose what you want to do onto people. And that's where the nuance and the art form of, really comes into play. But I think that you have to know your audience. That's the other so important thing. I knew going into this that I was working with younger people. I'm getting older while they all stay the same age. Everybody stays young while I get old. I cannot come in to any work environment like 25-year-old Doug or 30-year-old Doug. I'm 50-year-old Doug. And I need to learn. And I think that that's one of the secrets of we're professionals. We went to school, we have degrees, and all of a sudden people come in and want to say, well, I'm the professional, so I want to tell you everything. And I'm like, personally, I'm just the opposite. Yeah, I might know certain things, but there's a lot more I don't know. And there's a ton that I want to learn. And I think that's one of the most critical elements of anybody coming in. And that's why I think there's probably been so much blowback from the community in esports when there are people that are not endemic that come in and then, and want to try to hawk their wares in a certain way. And so I think it's justified because, at the end of the day, I have to know what an 18-year-old is thinking like today. And I think that as professionals, one of the things that I always say to people when they start questioning anything about a young performer, the one question I always ask is, what were you like at 18? And then usually when I ask that question to people, they get real quiet real quick. Because we have to remember what we were like when we were 18 years old. What were we like when we were 22? What were we going through? And it's not going to be a one-to-one correspondence. It's not like we're trying to impose like our own experiences onto what they're experiencing, but on a global scale, we have to remind ourselves that it's tough being 18. It's tough being 20. It's not easy. And so if we can have some empathy, if we can have some understanding of where people are in their lives developmentally, then that's going to help us meet them where they are instead of us coming in and trying to tell them what they need to do.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I think that parallels really well with how, if there's physical therapists or any other healthcare profession that's interested in maybe working in esports, better understanding exactly where they're coming from is going to be the number one thing I would ask someone to take into account or consider. Because Caitlin and I have probably received millions of emails about people asking, hey, what's the best way to get into esports? I'm a kinesiologist, I'm a athletic trainer, I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I have all these great ideas. And my thought is like, hey, well, you spelled esports wrong, with a capital S. I think you should take the first step and really understand, like you said, know your audience. You should understand the community. You should understand these sort of generalized thoughts that they have associated with, let's say, physical therapy or conditioning, because those are the beliefs that you're going to have to, address slowly. Yeah, you're going to have to work with them to address those beliefs. And, in the PT field, we call them thought viruses, right? If a 50 or 60-year-old believes that an MRI will cause them to never be able to stand or walk again, we have to address that thought virus and say, hey, actually, the research shows there's no real correlation between an MRI and your actual clinical symptoms. So in the same way, if someone that's 18 or 20, they believe, hey, well, if I keep playing, I know that Faker or the best player in the world keeps playing and he doesn't really do this, so it's probably not right. I mean, you have to really work with those barriers and work with them and understand where they're coming from in terms of what thoughts they're having, and be able to educate them properly. And that really is the art of working with people on an individual basis and being able to build trust and build rapport, so that they're willing to maybe take some of these steps and try what you're asking them to do, instead of, again, you coming in and saying, hey, well, I know best because I'm a doctor. That's not enough for anyone these days anyways. The doctor can only really go so far on social media. I mean, the authority switch that I feel like so many people try to flip when they're trying to convince people to do things is not the way anymore. It's really, hey, you need to understand people. You need to understand how to speak with people, so that, show them the real intent that you're trying to help them, so that you can provide them really clear information of how you would like them to approach a certain situation.
I am really, really grateful we're leaving that whole paternalistic model of medicine behind. It's a much more engaged and incorporative process. It's buy-in from the patient matters, because they're a huge part of their own recovery.
Exactly.
And like those millions of emails you mentioned, I'm pretty certain that 90% of the emails that I've responded to asking, like, how do I get into esports? Like, there are 3 things that I've told literally everyone. Even if you don't play video games, or if you don't play fighting games, start going to your locals, because it's one of the best ways to meet like competitors in person. Start playing video games in general, and get a Twitter and start following a whole bunch of people in esports, because the only way that you're going to really understand what the need is and whether or not you're actually going to meet it with your brilliant ideas is to get immersed in the scene. And that could be, the esports scene as a whole, following a whole bunch of things from a little bit of everywhere, or it could be finding a specific niche you love. Maybe you love fighting games, maybe you love first person shooters, but you're not going to know what people need or want or are interested in, or what thought viruses they have, if all you know is what you already know.
Yeah.
That like desire to learn more, like a genuine desire, not a I want to learn and then I want to go do the thing without having to learn anymore. That desire to constantly learn more, like to be genuinely excited about learning more, is absolutely key. Like, I remember geeking out the first time I realized that, oh my God, this pattern I've been seeing is because all these people are L canceling the same way. I get it. I understand
Yeah.
now. This is so awesome.
Exactly.
That like degree of excitement of wanting to do better by the people that you're working with that's the basis of all of it.
Well, and you're modeling a behavior to also do. You want them to not be afraid.
Yeah.
To take it, learning something and trying something new is a risk, and it is scary. And part of our job as professionals is to acknowledge that and to say, listen, I understand that working on this, it freaks you out, that it makes you realize, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this and do everything else that I'm doing? And the more that we can acknowledge the human aspects, that people fear change and fear working on something, fear demonstrating incompetence at something. And if we know that going into it, then it's the culture and the environment that we create that allows for people to try something without judgment, without getting negative feedback, understanding that this is just a starting point, not an ending point. And so when you give people permission to give themselves some wiggle room to work and grow and improve, once they start seeing improvement, you're tapping into the most powerful tool there is, and it's this thing called intrinsic motivation. I'm seeing myself improve. I'm comparing myself with myself instead of myself to others, which we know that that's huge in culture today, that everybody is comparing themselves with others and everybody feels like they're always falling short. But let's go back to scientific principles. Let's go back to theory. Let's go back to some certain basic tenets that at the end of the day, we're trying to teach people to compare themselves with themselves, to work on growth and improvement, and to understand that learning and making mistakes are basically the same thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess us showing that we don't know everything, us asking our players for their input, for their feedback, for their perspective, I imagine it makes them that much more comfortable with working with us too, because we've made ourselves vulnerable. We've indicated, I'm telling you straight out, I don't know everything. Here are the things I'm confident in. Here's the things I'm going to learn more from you. And this is a process we're working on together. Then it doesn't feel so much like you're just another person telling them what to do. Then it feels like you're kind of on their side, on their team. And it's a process you're going through together, as opposed to I'm looking down at you and judging you for getting what I'm telling you wrong.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I have one more question that I wanted to ask you, Doug, and I'm sure we can get a little more deep into this this conversation probably in another episode. But I want to ask you, what do you think the next step is, for esports in terms of building out, health and performance, or furthering the industry when it comes to health and performance in esports?
Well, I think some form developmental system is critical for esports. It has been proven in traditional sports that if you provide competitive opportunities for younger, less experienced players to allow them to get that sample size up, to get more experience playing, to understand that a one-trick wonder in a game could actually be somebody who becomes a very diversified player and could play many different heroes or champions depending on the game. That development takes time, and if organizations commit to player development and they commit to the concept of helping people grow as both individuals and as performers, then you're going to see kind of the best of that. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping for, is that esports, as it grows and expands, will make that commitment, just like the NBA has. I mean, the NBA has, Major League Baseball, NHL have developmental systems, have minor league systems, but if you look at the NBA model, it's the one professional league where it's the least amount of people, but there is talent, and players are coming out after their freshman year of college, 18, 19-year-old, but they're not ready to play in the NBA. So the NBA has had to develop the G League to help these players grow and develop as people and as performers. And that takes time. And then, unfortunately, in some ways, that takes money. But I believe that every dollar spent in player development will not only be recouped, but you're putting an organization in a position to, I don't want to say profit off of player development, but if you're developing players and you have talent and organizations want that talent, or you're able to utilize and bring that talent up, then there are financial benefits to player development. So you can really get the best of both worlds. You can do what makes sense for your organization financially, but you're also committing to the concepts of player development at the same time.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add?
That's definitely that's definitely one of the really useful techniques for getting buy-in from organizations, that making it clear what we provide in terms of a monetary benefit, as well as, I guess a physical one and a mental health one to the players. It's, like it or not, that's part of the industry. This is an industry that is in business to make money.
Mm-hmm.
So what role do we play in helping the business making enterprises of these organizations? Well, here's how we help with that.
Right. I think it's also important to say that, hey, there's a lot of leagues right now that already have sort of these academy leagues or contenders, but I'm not sure if the perspective of developing these or bringing these, I guess, B or D leagues were with the intent of saying, hey, we need to develop these players. I think it maybe some people might have thought about that, but I would like to have them hopefully maybe see this and say, hey, well, maybe we should think about the development side of this contender league or the development side of this academy league, and see if we can add any sort of infrastructure within our own league to support it, to then allow the teams that are participating in whatever league it is to actually provide these internal systems within the infrastructure of the big league. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that it's important that maybe Overwatch and League of Legends and maybe even CSGO. I know CSGO for a while, they tried to have some academy teams. But really, like leagues, this is more for the leagues or the publishers to think about how they can incorporate this lens of development for their academy leagues or for their G leagues or for their contenders leagues, and see if they can provide the infrastructure so that organizations like us can buy in and then utilize our own resources to develop the players. And really it creates this nice ecosystem where it benefits both, right? It benefits ourselves, and then it benefits the league, in that we're creating better players and we're raising the standard for overall what a professional player is. So yeah, I love that. I mean, I think you're exactly right. And yeah, I mean, I think that's all the questions that I had today. I do definitely want to talk more with you, Doug, about likely other topics, and maybe even deep dive a little more on this one, as I said. But yeah, I really want to thank you so much for just taking the time out of your busy day to chat with me and Kate, and her cat. And
yeah, sorry, she was I
understand.
Behind me, and I needed to not have that on my microphone, and the only way I could get her to stop doing that was to pick her up.
Yes.
This is Koodaloon, everyone. Koodaloon says hi. Okay, Kaylin's going into hiding again.
Oh, great. Listen, I really continue doing like this. It was a lot of fun.
So that was Dr. Doug Gardner, the Director of Performance at Immortals. You guys can find Doug on Twitter at ThinkSport and learn more about how he can help you at www.thinksport.com. We're going to be linking to those places and any other resources we talked about on the show notes page at 1-hp.org/podcast. Thank you guys again and hope to see you soon.